Then had to fight at the
Harvest Club, and they got the subjects doing anything. We went out and played one night and was coming in. We stopped at a railroad crossing right in downtown Beaumont, right there on Pearl Street, and big freight train going through there. And Jack and Shane was in the back seat, and I heard a door slam on the car, and I looked, and Shane was running for that train. And I mean, that train was moving. I heard the other door slam. Jack went out the other side chasing him, and Shane grabbed the freight. Last we saw him, they was going out of town, and you could see Shane running down the top of boxcars and Jack chasing him. That's the way they went out of Beaumont. You could see them in the street lights. And that train was going, I'm telling you. And Jack was afraid that he was going to fall off the train, so he was going to help him and catch him. And they went out of town. Last we saw, Shane running, Jack chasing him on top of boxcars, leaping like that. Well, whatever happened to him, we don't know. Next day at the radio program, they come walking in, and Shane said, we got down as far as that part was out, I don't know, around Liberty someplace, and the train slowed down, and he jumped off, and then he jumped off, and they had to, on a ride back to Beaumont to get there in time for the program. And little things like that, they would do about anything. They said they pulled in, they were going someplace, and Jack had a truck of some kind, and some little town between here and Hallettsville or someplace, and they decided they'd go in there and get them a bite to eat in a little restaurant. They walked with the back of the truck, and Jack had a chain in there with a lock on it or something. He told Shane, wait a minute. He went over to Shane and said, put your hands out. And he put that chain around Shane's wrist with that lock and had the other end of the chain and led him in this cafe. And people was in there eating. Here comes Jack in there, great big guy, leading Shane on a chain. And he said, sit down over there. Shane sat down over there. And he said, you could hear knife and forks hitting the table, you know. So Jack looked up and said, he escaped from the asylum, I'm taking him back. He said, man, you seen people with accident. Said finally the guy that runs the place said, hey, I'll pay for y'all for doing it if you just get him out of here.
Asylum.
Yeah, with a big chain on it. So Jack had a place out off of Harrisburg on the wayside, a lot of houses after all residential area. And he was playing with Jared or somebody then. And he comes in about 2 o'clock in the morning, feeling no pain, and he pulls his vehicle in the garage there, and he went to set out his little piano amplifier, little Fender amp, and he's got his piano pickup in the back, and he went to set it out, and it dawned on him what he ought to do. He went and raised the hood on the truck. He took that piano pickup, and wedged it or taped it on the motor of the car, and plugged the other end of it into the amplifier and set the amplifier out in the driveway at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and went and started the truck and would race the motor through an amplifier, and you could hear him, you could see lights going on, all of them done with. Amplified the truck motor. Who would think doing something like that?
He brought a donkey home one night, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a place out in the city under the water tower right next to the police station. And Jack played there this night, and when he come out, there was a little old donkey tied in front of the police station. It got loose someplace, and the police had caught it and tied it to a post out there in the front, little big donkey. Jack seen that donkey over there, and he went over there and he told him it was his, which it wasn't. So he was going to take it home. So he worked and worked and finally got that donkey in the back seat of this vehicle he had, with the glass down, and that donkey had his head out. And he said, when I went through that Washburn tunnel, he said, y'all see those guards. You go through that, and this donkey's head hanging out the back of the... So he said, I get home with it, and he said, I tied it up out beside the house. And went to bed and forgot about it. But he said, man, about sunup, that donkey cut loose. You could hear him, said he was waking up people, I mean, he was doing his number. Woke up everybody and everything. And donkey tied there, and he was doing his waking up thing, and Jack had a window fan sitting in the window, and not knowing, he had backed up against that window fan and done a number, and Rose turned on the fan and blew it all in the house. A little bit policeman knocked on the door and said, we've come to get this donkey. He said, the rightful owners are out here that really own it. Okay. Take a donkey.
Now they had another brother they called a preacher brother.
Yeah, and a older one named Earl. Yeah, one was a preacher.
Well, wasn't the preacher brother they called, and They told him that there was a Shane
That
had
was
died?
Earl.
Earl?
Yeah,
Oh.
Earl was a professional gambler, and they was playing for Jerry Irby out there, and Jerry let them move in the club of all people, and lock them up in there and go home. And here they are with a bar full of drinks, and locked up in this club. He had a little bed up in front of his office, so he let them sleep in there. He'd lock them up in there. Man, they'd open that bar and just have a big old time, let people in the back door, plug in the jukebox, and have a party the rest of the night. So Shane said we was in there one night and drinking everything. He said we got to think about Earl's older brothers in a hotel in Dallas. He said me and Jack was drinking pretty heavy. He said Jack knew we had the phone on the hotel, and he called up there and woke Earl up 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. He said, Earl, got some bad news. What is that, Jack? He said, well, our brother Shane drowned last night. He said, I'm sitting there. What? Yeah, he went out fishing after Earl fell off the boat. Jack took another drink and said, I would too. Said he drowned after Earl. You know? Said, well, a little while Earl went to crying. Then he said, Jack went to crying. He said, then I went to crying. After a long time, he told me, no, I was just kidding. He's sitting right here. What a thing to do, to wake up your brother and tell him.
So they're about to, they'd do, pull anything. But I understand Shane was the fightingest of the two.
Yeah, he was more good-natured. If Jack liked you, okay. If he didn't, well, you kind of knew it. But no, you didn't want to fool with either one of them, especially Shane. If you got him mad at you.
Now, Shane and Jack is playing a thing one time, and Shane comes out of the bathroom, and the guy backs him up against the wall with a knife.
Yeah. Yeah, out in West Texas, Shane said Jack was playing piano and said I was playing bass. And said I couldn't wait till intermission, I had to go to the restroom. And he said I went to the restroom. When I come out, said this Spanish guy pulled a switchblade and backed me up against the wall and had this knife right in my stomach. And said Jack looked over the piano and saw it. And he said I couldn't move. And he said I was watching Jack. He said Jack reached up on top of the piano. He had a tuning hammer that you tune the piano with. He carried with him, which is like a ball peen hammer. He said, I seen Jack, said he picked up that tuning hammer, and said, I seen him come off the bandstand. He looked like that wolf in the movies running behind the tree. Shang with a knife in his stomach, and he gets something funny, you know. Said, here comes Jack with that tuning hammer up behind that Spanish guy, and said when he got up there, said he hit him right in the top of the head and just knocked him plumb down. And I said, what'd y'all do then? He said, well, we just took turns kicking him.
Now, speaking of ball peen hammers, we got to talk about this real quick. With Daddy, with his choice of weapons.
Yeah.
The one time that he was going to go down and whip that feller.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that way back when he kind of first started with us. Him and my mother hadn't been married all that long, and there's a promoter in Beaumont, a Spanish guy. And once in a while he'd go rent a hall, and then he'd hire a band to come play it for a certain amount, and then he'd keep all the money, whatever it was. So this guy hired Shelley and us, and who I was playing with, to play at the WOW Hall in Beaumont. So the night we were supposed to play, he called during the day, he called the house and said he had canceled it, we wasn't going to get to play it. So Shelley, he come on late, he said, you mean to tell me that you were firing Shelley Lee Alley? He said, well, Shelley, we're not going to have to, well, I decided not to have it. He said, I'm coming after you, fella. Oh, he told him, he said, you are one Mexican I can whoop. His words. Well, now this guy he's talking to probably weighed about 120 pounds, and Shelley did too. He said, I'm coming after you. He said, they're going to think there's 1,000 crap games going on in Beaumont, and I get through shaking you, fella. He grabbed the ball peen hammer and went out the back door, heading down after him, walking on the railroad track. Mama said, you better go catch him. And I did, and he was glad I did. He wasn't about going down there no kind of way.
Then he had a little run-in with Nellie Ruth.
Yeah, we had, that's back to when they bought the car after the highway thing. The car broke down, that was the same car. And we played somewhere in Louisiana, and Ted Hardy was a steel player, and he was married to a woman named Nellie Ruth, who was very jealous of him, and would get pretty uptight every now and then. So anyway, we was coming back on Highway 9, and you go through Lake Charles, then you go across the Calcasieu River there. And Nellie Ruth needed a pit stop. Well, there wasn't any service stations through there, so Ted pulled off the road by the river for her to go get behind a tree, I guess. And when she come back, the car keys was gone. And she took the car keys and threw them out there in the swamp someplace. And there we sat. And Shelley was in the front seat, her in the middle, Ted behind the wheel. So I don't know if he hot-wired it, I guess. Anyway, we got to Beaumont. So the next night we go to play, we start out the door. Ted's going to pick us up, him and Nell Ruth, and Shelley puts an ice pick in his pocket. My mother said, "What are you going to do with that ice pick?" And he said, "Nellie Ruth's not going to throw the keys away tonight." Which never happened before.
So his choice was a ball peen hammer and an ice pick.
Ice pick, yeah, his choice of weapon.
Mighty choice.
I mean,
Mighty choice of weapon.
yeah.
While we're thinking about it, explain the mandolin right here.
Okay, Leo Rayleigh was the first, as far as I've ever heard or know, was the first electric mandolin player. He played 8-string mandolin, and he come from up at Hubbard with the rest of the Rayleigh brothers, and he played with the Texas Wanderers and the top bands of the time, and he played 8-string mandolin, which all mandolins was 8 strings at that time. But he rigged up some kind of a pickup on it, and he was what we call the first electric mandolin player. And when he was with Floyd Tillman, he had this mandolin right here. Of course, he had a deal on the pickup on it. This was the mandolin he played when he was with Floyd Tillman. Mm-hmm. And I ended up with it because he had, there was a guy in town who played fiddle named Morgan Hill, and Morgan ended up with it, and Leo got him another mandolin some kind of way. And I traded a fiddle for this mandolin, not knowing at the time that it had been Leo's, and I have a picture of the 3 brothers together, and this is the mandolin in the picture. So this mandolin belonged to Leo Rayleigh, who was one of the first, you might call, Western swing mandolin players. Started back in the 30s sometime.
So Leo was the first one, as you know, that played electric mandolin.
Yes.
And then you run across Tiny Moore.
Yeah, I went to, back in the Beaumont days, I went to the Winter Garden one night to hear Moon, and this before I went to work with him. And when I walked in, he hired a mandolin player named Tiny Moore. And Tiny was playing a 4-string electric mandolin, like I'd never heard, and when I got home that night, I took 4 strings off my mandolin. Mm-hmm. When I heard him play it, and he was electric mandolin, he used 4 strings, and always did. He finally went to 5 like others, but those are the 2 top-notch mandolin players in Western swing music.
And historically, of course, with the tie-in, also, I briefly want to mention Bob Dunn.
Yeah.
Talking about, and you run on the last job that Bob Dunn played, Herbie, at the same time on the same bandstand.
Yeah.
Explain how that went.
Yeah. That was with the McBride band. What it was, Dick Jones had a band here, and Mac and Laura Lee was leaving Bob Wills and coming back to Houston. And Dickie's steel guitar player was Bob Dunn, who was the first jazz or first Western swing steel guitar player ever. And he had devised a little phonograph pickup back in the Milton Brown days and put on a regular guitar and raised the nut up to where he could play steel guitar. Was a high volume style to start with. Anyway, Bob Dunn was famous and a top-notch steel guitar player of his day, and he was playing with Dick Jones. And Matt and Laura had come back to town to start a band, and Herbie had left Bob Wills and had came back. And Bob Dunn was going to quit playing and go in and get him a music store. So his last night with McBride and Herbie's first night was out at a place in Highlands called the Riverview Inn. And it didn't dawn on me till years later, but I was playing that night with the best steel guitar player of the old era and with the best of the new one. Because Herbie was in his prime, and there was one on each end, 2 steel guitar players. And that was really a historical thing to be involved in. I didn't even think about it at that particular time. But Bob Dunn was a terrific player. All the Milton Brown records and all this stuff. He got him a music store and the music business.
And I understand all the guys in that era was copying Bob Dunn.
Oh yeah.
Trying to play like Bob Dunn.
Deacon Anderson still does. He plays more like him than anybody. Yeah, every steel guitar player then imitated Bob Dunn. Then Leon McCullough was the next best known after that.
And of course, then Herbie and still is today. Well, we still got a few minutes.